Okay, so today I am going to be going over a analysis of how location plus, stuff plus, and pitching plus correlate to earned run average, fielding independent pitching or FIP, and batting average on balls in play or BABIP. So, first thing I need to do, which I've already done, is download the data. So, open data, and first you get a data preview. As you can see, there are 657 total pitchers in this data set. This is a data set from 2025 of pitchers who threw at least 10 innings. So this is almost every pitcher who pitched in 2025. So the average earned run average was 4.45. Average fielding independent pitching was 4.33. And the average batting average on balls in play was 291. So first we are going to go to an analysis on earned run average. So just a second, this will load. So earned run average correlates to pitching plus. It's not very strong. Pretty weak correlation, 0.35, an R squared of 0.1252. And the p-value is extremely low, meaning that this is not due to chance. This is due to more of a likelihood of things happening this way. Apologies. So the residual minimum is negative 4.4. The maximum is 11.95. So as you can see, the residual plot, for the most part, is pretty straightforward. And there are a couple of outliers, as you can see, as well with ERA versus pitching plus. So, and as you can see, the pitching plus distribution, very normal for a histogram, and the average ERA goes up from, even with the higher pitching plus, between 65.7 to 79.1, but then the ERA tends to continue to go down, except for some of the pitchers with a very high pitching plus. Now we can go to how ERA affects stuff plus. And the correlation for stuff plus is even weaker than it is for pitching plus. And this will be a trend that we see throughout the data. And the p-value is also higher. So the E negative 10 means that it is 10 decimal places, whereas if we go back to pitching plus, it has E21. So that means it's 21 decimal places. So the pitching plus value, p-value, is much smaller. There is not a strong correlation, very low R squared value, and ERA versus stuff plus seem to be a couple more outliers here and there. And then the residual plot also seems to have a little bit more of a spread compared to pitching plus. And the distribution of stuff plus is actually a little bit lower than the distribution of pitching plus. And we may see that that is due to location plus having a higher grade. So as you can see, ERA correlates to stuff plus kind of similarly to pitching plus. It kind of starts pretty low for some of the low pitching plus, not pitching plus, stuff plus pitchers, but then it goes back up and then continues to go down. And then we can go to how it impacts location plus. Location plus has an even higher p-value, and it has a even lower correlation. So the correlation is not strong at all comparatively. It's even weaker than Stuff Plus and the ERA versus Location Plus. As you can see, it's a lot more spread out, and it's even more spread out than in the residual plot as well. And as you can see, Location Plus seems to have a distribution that goes a little higher and then seems to tail off around the 110 mark, 105, 110 mark. And then where it comes to Location Plus, the pitchers with lower Location Plus actually have a much higher ERA. And then it pretty much continues to go down. And then it kind of goes back up again when you get to the really high Location Plus statistics, which is pretty odd, meaning there's really not much of a correlation between this data. However, the p-value shows that this data is really not due to chance. Next, we are going to go to fielding independent pitching. And fielding independent pitching, when you go to Pitching Plus, it is actually an even stronger correlation than in the ERA analysis, higher R squared, and a much, much lower p-value, meaning that fielding independent pitching has a stronger correlation to Pitching Plus than it does to ERA, than an ERA does to Pitching Plus. So, as you can see, the residual plot, it's a little scattered, not quite as scattered as the residual plots for ERA. However, the plot is a lot more linear. There are not as many outliers when it comes to fielding independent pitching. And then the distribution of Pitching Plus in terms of fielding independent pitching is very, very, it's like pretty straightforward. It's looks like a histogram that you see laid out to you. And then when it comes to Pitching Plus bins, we have fielding independent pitching seems to consistently decrease as Pitching Plus increases, which is what you would expect. Whereas when it comes to ERA, there are some random increases that would not be as expected based on this data. And then we have Stuff Plus, again, weaker correlation, lower R squared, and a lower p-value, I believe, than Pitching Plus. No, a higher p-value than Pitching Plus. So Pitching Plus has much less randomness than Stuff Plus and Location Plus, as we'll see throughout the rest of this data. And then the residual plot and the scatter plot seem to have a pretty similar distribution to Pitching Plus, but it, again, is not as straightforward. There are a couple more outliers, and the residual plot is a little bit more scattered. And we have another random low fielding independent pitching for a low Stuff Plus, and then it spikes and then goes back down as you would expect. However, the distribution of Stuff Plus is lower than Pitching Plus, and that is due to Location Plus having a higher distribution. And we will go over to Location Plus next. So the correlation between Location Plus and fielding independent pitching is a little bit stronger than it is between Stuff Plus. And the p-value is ever so slightly lower, with an R squared value being, again, slightly higher. So these graphs are very similar, the Stuff Plus and Location Plus residual plots, and the distribution. As I said, the Location Plus has a slightly higher distribution. However, the fielding independent pitching predictor bins, it is a lot more scattered here, which shows that, yes, it does go down as the location plus gets higher for the most part, but again, it has a random spike here, and then it goes up, 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 as and then as location plus also goes up, which is quite odd. It's not what you'd expect. And then next we are going to get into BABIP. And then we have a very, very weak correlation between BABIP and pitching plus. So the R squared is literally 0.0033 with a p-value that is much closer to 1. So as you can see, the residual plot is a lot more spread out, as is the regression line. So BABIP is definitely a little bit worse of a predictor of stuff plus, pitching plus, and location plus for sure. As you can see, it's pretty much a straightforward distribution with a spike from 72.5 to 79.1, and the pitching plus distribution again is very straightforward. And then next, I would assume stuff plus has it appears that it has a slightly higher correlation. Hold on just a second. Negative 0.07 versus negative 0.05. So stuff plus does have a slightly stronger correlation, stronger negative correlation. Oddly, these have all had negative correlations, and that is something that is going to be a trend throughout the rest of this data. And as you can see, this scatter plot is very, very spread out. There's not much of a straightforward linear progression, as is the case with the residual plot. And then BABIP seems to just stay the same regardless of someone's stuff plus. It's very straightforward. Not really anybody much higher in BABIP than another pitcher with a higher or lower stuff plus. And lastly, we will go to location plus, and R squared is 0. So this one has an even weaker correlation than pitching plus. So, and oddly enough, this one has a positive correlation, which is something I honestly did not expect. So I guess this positive correlation, I mean, it is extremely minimal, meaning that there is basically no correlation in this data. And the p-value is very close to 1 comparatively to all of the other data. So, as you can see, this graph is very spread out, as is this one. And again, the distribution of location plus is higher than stuff plus and pitching plus, which kind of makes it all even out. And oddly, again, there is a random spike in BABIP for pitchers with location plus of 117 to 123, which is actually a very good location plus. So again, there's basically no correlation in this data, and every other BABIP bin seems to have approximately the same, every location plus bin seems to have the same BABIP. And lastly, we are going to go to a correlation matrix. So here's correlation matrix and the correlation heat map. So BABIP, its correlation to, so BABIP's correlation to itself is 1, and its correlation to FIP and ERA is positive. And then we see some negative correlations in the bottom left of the heat map with Stuff Plus to Location Plus. And aside from that, this is all negative, this is all negative, this is all positive, and 7 out of 9 of these are positive. So lastly, we'll go to a summary. So how do Location, Stuff Plus, and Pitching Plus correlate to ERA? Pitching Plus has a moderate correlation, whereas the Stuff Plus and Location Plus have a weak correlation. And then they all have moderate correlations to fielding independent pitching. And again, all of these are negative correlations. And then we have Location Plus to BABIP has a positive correlation. The other two are negative. And the R values are all extremely low in comparison to both ERA and FIP. And then the best predictor of ERA is Pitching Plus. The best predictor of fielding independent pitching is also Pitching Plus. And BABIP, none of these are good indicators to predict BABIP. So, and as you can see, here is the table of all of the correlations. So this is a summary of all of the data from pitchers who threw at least 10 innings in 2025. Hope you enjoyed, and everyone have a great rest of your day.